The passage of time is marked by natural rhythms, sunsets, seasons, celestial rotations. But time itself has a history. As people sought to quantify time, they created ever-evolving technologies to record the passing of hours, minutes, seconds. As sophisticated timepieces became widespread, new concepts of time reordered people's lives. Yet alongside these changes, many rhythms of rituals and seasons remained constant.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2023 Dan David Prize Ceremony. My name is Tamar Shalom, and I will be your host this evening as we celebrate the second cohort of winners of the renewed Dan David Prize. I would like to welcome all of our guests who have come to Tel Aviv from around the world and to thank Eldad Zitrin and the ensemble of musicians who opened the ceremony. Weren't they amazing? They will accompany the entire ceremony, including musical performances that reflect on ideas inspired by the work of historians and archaeologists. The opening segment looked at evolving concepts of time to illustrate the tension between continuity and change. Our ensemble will also play music composed or adapted specifically to respond to the research of each of our 9 winners. The Dan David Prize celebrates the creative research undertaken by outstanding historians, archaeologists, and other scholars in the historical disciplines, as well as by curators, documentarists, and public historians at the early or mid stages of their careers. Each of tonight's winners will be awarded $300,000 intended both to reward their achievements and support their future endeavors. They will also receive a statuette specially designed for the new prize by renowned Israeli artist Tzadok Ben David. The 9 winners were chosen by a selection committee of experts from around the world before being ratified by the prize's board. We would like to thank both the selection committee and the board for their work. We are glad many of them, indeed, have traveled from abroad to be with us here tonight. Before we meet the first set of winners, let's hear about the man whose passion for archaeology and history is the reason that we are all here tonight, the late Dan David.
The ancient Greek statesman Pericles said, "What you leave behind is what is woven into the life of others."
Dan David was born May the 23rd, 1929 in Bucharest, Romania, as Dan Goldenthal. A curious and inventive child, he grew up in a multilingual environment, always keen to learn and pursue new things. He developed the leadership skills that shaped his character during the years he spent in a Zionist youth movement, helping relocate Jewish Holocaust survivors.
Divento molto attivo in questo campo, entro nella gruppi di giovani, vivevano insieme e si preparavano a partire in quello che allora era la Palestina e che doveva diventare Israele.
The boy who grew up in the shadow of a world war became an award-winning photojournalist, despite being a target of Romania's post-war communist regime, whose secret police arrested, interrogated and harassed him constantly.
Se sei un nemico del potere popolare, della classe operaia e del Partito Comunista.
It was after fleeing to Israel and during a visit to Paris that he first came across an automatic photo booth. That's when he decided to leave the art of photography for the business of photography. Bank financing was off the table for a penniless refugee, but thanks to a generous loan from a distant cousin, he was able to bring the first automatic photo booth to Tel Aviv. He never looked back, ultimately placing thousands of photo booths all over the globe and creating a business that employed thousands of people across Europe, the US and Japan.
Sì, mi piace. Bella, veramente bella. Congratulazioni. Grazie.
Dan and his wife Gabby, together with their son Ariel, were fascinated by the history and beauty of Rome, which they called home for many years. They also enjoyed cycling all over the world and cultivated a passion for history and archaeology, with Dan taking his young son Ariel to ancient sites and museums wherever they traveled. Dan's curiosity never waned, and neither did his desire to give back to society. In 2000, he established the Dan David Foundation to support research and higher education in the humanities and sciences. The Dan David Prize remains the Foundation's flagship project and was his most valued philanthropic legacy. This is what he said at the prize's 10th anniversary.
I don't know for how many more years I will be back with you on this stage. But you and your descendants after you should continue to follow, to cherish the prize, its ideas, its concept for many generations.
And so we do, and will continue to do so in loving memory.
We think of Dan David tonight and celebrate his lasting impact as we add 9 new names to the list of Dan David Prize winners. To begin the ceremony, I would like to invite to the stage Professor Itamar Rabinovich, chairperson of the Dan David Foundation, and Professor Rocio Dariva, a member of the Dan David Prize Board, to award the first prizes. Our first winner created a unique methodology to learn about life in the past by studying the dust particles that accumulate in teeth. The selection committee described her as a highly original and innovative scientist whose work contributes insights to fields as diverse as the history of labor, women's history, and environmental history. Here is Anita Radini.
The woman was buried in a German nunnery sometime between 997 and 1162. Anita Radini and her colleagues studied her remains, looking at her teeth to learn about her diet and oral health, and they found traces of lapis lazuli used to make the blue pigment ultramarine. This pigment was so expensive in the Middle Ages that only master illuminators would use it. Its presence in this woman's teeth is the first direct archaeological evidence that women artists participated in the production of high-quality illuminated manuscripts, contrary to the previous belief that master illuminators were all men. Anita Radini is an assistant professor at University College Dublin. She's an archaeological scientist who uses dental plaque to uncover past environments and working conditions.
When we put a little bit of dust under the microscope, we can see that the dust contains tiny particles of the environment in which it formed. Every time we breathe in or we eat things with a little bit of dust, we're actually eating and breathing a portion, a microscopic portion of the environment that we are experiencing during life. That environment is very specific to the way we live and what we do for a living. The fact that now we can study this dust from the dental tartar of ancient people is something that really motivates me and that I really found fascinating.
Congratulations, Anita. You can come back and join me. Thank you. Our second winner challenges prevailing narratives about the power balance between Europe and Asia in the first age of globalization, creating both traditional and digital history projects. The selection committee described him as a researcher of outstanding range and analytical insight whose scholarship has introduced novel interpretations of European expansion. This is Adam Klulo.
Peter Noitz arrived in Edo in 1627 to serve as a special ambassador of the Dutch East India Company to the Shogun of Japan. He was accompanied by an impressive entourage and was equipped with both opulent gifts and with a clear set of demands. Just 1 month later, his embassy rejected, he prepared to flee in the night. As he attempted to leave, his palanquin was halted by officials and his bearers abandoned him, leaving the ambassador sprawled alone in the street. Adam Klulo explains that this case is not atypical. When representatives of European enterprises like Peter Noitz tried to push into a world dominated by powerful Asian states, they often found themselves powerless, marooned on the edges of an international environment they could not dominate. Adam Klulo is a professor at the University of Texas, Austin. He studies European-Asian interactions in the early modern period and uses digital tools such as virtual reality and video games to study and teach about history.
I was born in South Africa, but I moved to Japan when I was 20 to enroll in university there. After living in Japan for a number of years, I've never really stopped moving, swapping cities and countries every few years. I'm fascinated by the stories of people caught between cultures, trying to navigate the first great age of globalization in the 17th century. This could be European ambassadors sent to meet with the shogun in the sprawling city of Edo, or a young Japanese mercenary who found himself at the center of an international conspiracy case, or a Balinese enslaved woman who won her freedom and reinvented herself as a wealthy Chinese entrepreneur in a Dutch colony. These stories are often hidden, buried deep in the archives, but finding them has been one of the most exciting parts of my career.
Congratulations, Adam. Our third winner explores women's economic and legal relationships to slavery, revealing women's roles in the transatlantic slave trade as both enslavers and enslaved. The selection committee lauded her innovative use of oral history sources to ask new questions and construct potent narratives about the past. Her name is Stephanie Johns-Rogers.
George White, a formerly enslaved man, was interviewed in 1937 about his experiences as a slave. He explained that his mistress, the woman who owned him, was a dressy woman. When she wanted a dress, he said, she would sell a slave. In her research, Stephanie Jones-Rogers uses stories like this to show how white women were directly involved in slavery and to highlight the nonchalance with which they treated their slaves, who they saw as a form of currency as well as labor. Stephanie Jones-Rogers is a Chancellor's Professor of History at the University of California, Berkeley. She specializes in African American history and women's history, focusing on white women's investment in slavery and the continued subjugation of enslaved people, and more broadly, on women's roles within the transatlantic slave trade, both as enslavers and enslaved.
As a descendant of enslaved people, the history of slavery is deeply personal for me. I grew up not knowing about this part of my family's past, and I felt a void in my life because I didn't know. I was drawn to the history of slavery because of a profound longing to know more about myself and my ancestors. And over the years, as I focused my scholarly attention on the history of the enslaved, that void has disappeared.
Brava, Stephanie, and thank you, Professor Rabinovich and Professor Deriva, for presenting the first three prizes. I would now like to invite to the stage Professor Ariel Porat, President of Tel Aviv University and Chairperson of the Dan David Prize Board.
Good evening. This is the second year we are awarding the Dan David Prize in its new format. While the prize previously recognized achievements in all areas, it now focuses solely on study of the past. This change was made for several reasons, including the late Dan David's passion for history and archaeology. Tonight, I want to focus on another reason for the change, that it particularly close to my heart as a scholar, as the president of Tel Aviv University, and as the chairperson of the Dan David Prize Board. That reason is actually a need, the need to bolster the humanities. Israel is well known as the startup nation. Our country's economic resilience is due, in great part, to its being a global technological leader. We cannot underestimate the importance of the sciences for further developing high-tech and biotech. Yet, technological strength cannot stand alone. It must be nourished by humanism, by a liberal, pluralistic, and democratic ethos. Just as the coronavirus epidemic demonstrated the vital role of biomedical sciences, the current period in the State of Israel spotlights the crucial importance of social sciences, law, philosophy, culture, and history. As many of you are well aware, these days, the State of Israel is experiencing unprecedented threats to its democratic foundation. Tau leaders, the Tau Senate, and many faculty members have not shied away and have clearly expressed their views through speech and acts against what many of us believe to be an existential threat to our continuation as a democratic state. All universities in Israel joined forces and, together with other central and influential sectors of our society, took part in a huge protest against the governmental initiatives which have been temporarily halted. Indeed, from social sciences and humanities, we learn of the fragility of democracy, of how quickly a country can become anti-democratic, and of how to counter such a dangerous trend. But despite the great importance of the humanities, the global crisis in this field continues in Israel as well. The younger generation is less inclined to enroll in the humanities. They see it as a luxury with no practical benefit. Our challenge then, both as a society and as an institution of higher education, is to reinforce the humanities and restore its influence and prestige, something we recognize this evening in awarding the Dan David Prize to 9 historians and archaeologists. Among the steps we are taking at Tel Aviv University, I will mention 5. First, with the support of the Mandel Foundation, we are encouraging and in some cases requiring that all income students of STEM take core courses in the humanities. We believe that every educated person should be familiar with humanistic thought, which is also increasingly recognized as helpful for any career. Second, Tau is offering special interdisciplinary programs that integrate humanities into applied scientific fields. For example, the iTech Plus study program combines humanities with computer science. A third step we are planning is a public humanistic initiative in which students who are trained as advocates of the humanities will be embedded in companies and organizations, both in the public and private spheres. They will serve as agents of change for the perception of the humanities among the wider public. A fourth step, we hope to roll out are tailored study frameworks in the humanities for people in their mid-career, such as lawyers, engineers, and doctors, for both general education and enrichment. Our fifth and final step is to spotlight the humanities' central position in academia, culture, and society, which is exactly what the Dan David Prize accomplishes for historical fields. I am happy and proud that one of the most generous and esteemed prizes in the world in the humanities is being given for the second year by the Dan David Foundation in partnership with Tel Aviv University. Congratulations to the 9 winners. We applaud you for your brave and careful work in illuminating deeper understandings of the past. This work is so critical for us as we navigate the troubled present and uncertain future. Thank you.
Toda. Thank you, Professor Porat, for your important words. And now an interpretation of another theme, how historians and archaeologists move between the micro details and macro context as they represent the past in all its variety and complexity. Thank you once more to Eldad Zitrin and Tonight Ensemble for that beautiful performance. Now I am delighted to welcome to the stage Mrs. Gabriela David, wife of the late Dan David, and Professor Mark Steif, rector of Tel Aviv University, to present the next prizes. Our fourth winner combines the history of genetics and biology with the history of the modern Middle East. The selection committee noted that her work is remarkable for using sources in a wide range of languages that allow her to tell a story of the Middle East as a cohesive region rather than a set of individual national narratives. Here is Elise Burton.
Lebanese anthropologist Fouad Khouri recalled being taught at university in the 1950s how to use calipers to measure the heads of his classmates and relate these measurements to ethnic ancestry. As he explained humorously, he became famous in his dorm as an expert on origins, using fingers rather than calipers to measure his classmates' heads and pronounce their supposed identities. This incident and others appear in Elise Burton's research and clearly show that even after 1945, ideas about racial classification continued to shape science and society in the Middle East and worldwide. Elise Burton is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. She's a historian of the life sciences in the modern Middle East. In her research, she tries to understand how new sciences like genetics and biomedicine were connected with the formation of racial, ethnic, and national identities.
I think studying the interactions and motivations of people in the past is particularly important in the history of science, because many of us might assume that science is simply the accumulation of facts that are just out there in the natural world waiting to be discovered. But in reality, science is a complex and contingent process. It involves people working within all kinds of intellectual, political, and economic constraints. So studying the history of science is a powerful way to understand how this process shapes and sometimes limits human knowledge, both in the past and in the present.
Congratulations, Elise. And now on to our fifth winner, a social and cultural historian of modern Nigeria who produces rich scholarship by focusing on specific topics and exploring their broader implications. The selection committee described him as a research leader who is breaking new ground in fields like the history of animals and the history of violence while covering a remarkable range of subjects. This is Saheed Aderinto.
In 1956, Queen Elizabeth II visited Nigeria 4 years before it gained independence. While there, she met colonial subjects of diverse ethnicities, classes, and religions, but her visit encompassed more than just her human subjects. Saheed Aderinto's research points out that the Queen also met a wide range of animals, from the cows that provided milk for her stay, to Burtu, a hornbill who acted as a military mascot, to 2,546 beautiful Durbar horses with jingling ornaments and decorated saddles. At the same time, in preparation for her visit, the streets were cleaned of stray dogs, which were described as mangy or feral. Animals were part of the spectacle that legitimized imperialism, carefully curated to prove that the domain of Her Majesty's power transcended the human world. Saheed Adarinto is a professor at Florida International University. He's a social and cultural historian of modern Nigeria.
I've always been interested in topics that don't have predictable outcomes. For instance, how does the big question of nation building play out in private, intimate relationships? How does a gun, an instrument of human destruction across the world, become a daily ritual object in some parts of Africa? Under what circumstances would an animal become a colonial subject? Or how can biographies of animals help understand human history? So whether I write about sex or guns or animals, I've always been interested in going beyond expanding the frontiers of knowledge to revealing uncommon perspectives about everyday things, ideas, and people.
Bravo, Saheed. Our sixth winner has unearthed the rich and contorted history of nationalism and imperialism in the Soviet Union, focusing on how ethnic minority communities were incorporated into the state. The selection committee was impressed with the deep impact her work has had on studies of the Soviet Union at a time when such scholarship is both rare and sorely needed. I am very pleased to introduce Krista Goff.
In 1959, the Soviet Union held a population census. The census claimed that the population of the Talish, an ethnic group indigenous to the Caucasus, had declined over the previous 20 years from nearly 90,000 to a mere 85 individuals. Many resisted their erasure by asserting that they were Talish to those who tried to deny it. They continued to teach their suppressed language, history, and traditions to their children and communities. 30 years after the census that tried to erase them, Talishes regained state recognition, but continue to face challenges. Krista Goff's research highlights the struggles minoritized communities like the Talish experienced during the Soviet era and the ways in which these dynamics continue today in states that still grapple with the legacy of Soviet-era politics and practices. Krista Goff is an associate professor at the University of Miami. Her research focuses on the creation of minorities and minority identities in the Soviet Union.
Some of the central questions that I ask in my work are who belonged in Soviet republics, who belonged in the Soviet or post-Soviet future, and who had the power to determine that belonging. My work is about what happened in the past, but it is also about the present, about the intersection of power and the work that historians do, about the ways in which state actors seek to suppress or erase certain histories, why some histories are underrepresented in the historical record, and why many want to keep it that way today. Being able to have critical, nuanced, and informed conversations, whether in the classroom or elsewhere, helps us understand not only the past, but also the world in which we live today and where we want to go in the future.
Congratulations, Krista, and thank you, Mrs. Gabriela Davin and Professor Mark Steif. I would now like to invite to the stage Eldad, board member of the Dan David Foundation and son of the late founder of the prize.
Professor Eliel Porat, President of Tel Aviv University, Professor Mark Steif, Lector, Mrs. Daphne Meitar-Nechmad, Chair of the Board of Governors, Mr. Eli Gelman, Chair of the Executive Council, members of the board, dear guests and friends. So this is the second year that we gather here to celebrate the winners of the Dan David Prize in its reimagined format as the world's largest history award. And as always, I want to express my deep appreciation to those who have led this transformation and made this evening possible. My thanks go especially to Professor Tamar Rabinovich, Chair of the Dan David Foundation. You saw him before. And to the Director of the Prize, Charlotte Halle, and her entire team, as well as all the faculty and administration at Tel Aviv University who support us, starting with Professor Porat and onward. And I also wish to thank the members of the selection committee and the board of the prize, some of whom are here with us tonight, for their work in choosing a cohort of outstanding recipients. And I have to say that this year's prize winners have all made unique contributions to reconstructing the past, from illuminating the living and working conditions of ancient peoples, to understanding the different ways modern societies view the human psyche and its pathologies. We haven't got to that part, but soon. And dear winners, I warmly congratulate you all for this well-deserved achievement. And I must add that on a personal level, I feel that this year's prize embodies my father's vision in a very concrete way. Why is that? So as some of you may know, since the prize's inception 22 years ago, 10% of the award's purse has always been dedicated to scholarships for young researchers in the same fields as the winners. This tradition continues in the new format of the prize with the funding of the Dan David Fellowships for postdoctoral researchers in the historical disciplines here at Tel Aviv University. The scholarship program was always one of my father's favorite aspects of the prize because he felt it was contributing to jumpstart the career of young researchers who would become leaders in their field. And he always used to tell these young scholars that one day they would be among the recipients of the main prize. So in 2013, a promising doctoral candidate who was writing her thesis on the reciprocal modern conceptions of Judaism and Christianity was awarded one of those scholarships. And today, 10 years later, in a few minutes, we will celebrate Dr. Karma Ben Yochanan as one of the winners of the main Dan David Prize. So I am overjoyed that for the first time, my father's promise and prophecy has come true, and I'm certain that in his spirit, this award will inspire and help all our 9 winners to reach even greater heights in their fields. And speaking of my father, I must say that I think about him a lot lately, not just because I've recently become a father myself, and we miss him as we celebrate the first birthday. We just celebrated the first birthday of his granddaughter, Alice. But I think of him because I wonder what he would make of recent troubling developments in the world, and as you heard, especially the developments here in Israel, a country that he deeply loved and supported throughout his life. This country is now facing an unprecedented internal struggle in which the political forces in power are attempting to transform what is, with all its flaws, a secular liberal democracy into an authoritarian, ultranationalist, theocratic regime. It is heartening that large sections of Israel's civil society, including the leadership of Tel Aviv University, have rallied against this nefarious project, enacting widespread protests against this attempted power grab. In these days of uncertainty and strife, I think back to how my father contrasted life in Israel, and especially life on this university campus, with his days as a university student in communist Romania in the 1950s. Everything was gray, I'm quoting. The buildings, the students, the professors. It was as if the constant fear and misery and terror under which we lived had drained all color and joy from life. While here on the campus of Tel Aviv University, all I see is color in the plants and flowers, in the art and buildings, and especially in the diverse body of students and faculty, all working together to create a better future for themselves and their peers. End quote. I think that we must continue to do all that is in our power to make sure that Israel, and by extension this campus, does not become the gray, dystopic environment that my father experienced and which characterizes all authoritarian regimes, no matter their ideological roots. You, the winners of the prize, and all people who study the past, play a key role in preserving democratic values in Israel and around the world. Understanding how societies developed in the past is key to illuminating their behavior in the present and making better decisions for the future. And if knowledge of our past doesn't circulate freely in our societies, we easily fall prey to myth makers, to the purveyors of propaganda and alternative facts, who would weaponize history for their ideological purposes. And without democracy, without the freedom to teach and research, to ask new questions and find evidence-based answers, there can be no true history, no humanities, no science, no honest academic pursuits. My greatest hope is that this campus will continue to be a beacon of research and humanistic enlightenment, and that we will continue to meet in this colorful, joyful, free place to celebrate the winners of the Dan David Prize for many years to come. Thank you.
Toda rabah. Thank you so much, Ariel. Your words are a reminder of why the work we are celebrating this evening is so important. And now to our next winners. I'm honored to invite to the stage Professor Spencer Crew, a member of this year's selection committee, and Professor Miri Rubin, a member of the prizes board. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our seventh winner, a digital humanist who uses technology to reclaim African people's role in telling their own history. The selection committee lauded the momentous impact of her work, both in creating digital heritage projects and in highlighting the potential of digital platforms to assist in the restitution of African material culture. She is Ciao Tayana Maina.
While still an undergraduate student, Ciao Tayana Maina began traveling Kenya, photographing train stations before they were demolished in what will become her Save the Railway project. At one railway station near the coast of Kenya, someone stopped her and asked, "Why are you taking photos of these useless buildings? Take a photo of me instead." This prompted her to consider that sometimes history is hiding right in front of us. As her project became more well-known, she began receiving emails from people all over Kenya and the world with photographs and memories. This highlighted for her the potential of participatory digital heritage projects, which can reposition history as something to which everyone can contribute. Ciao Tayana Maina is a public historian who uses digital technologies to capture and preserve previously hidden or suppressed historical narratives in Kenya. She is the founder of African Digital Heritage.
At the core of it, I think that history is really an attempt to articulate the human experience of the past on behalf of those in the present and those that come in the future. It is the foundation of who we are, how we navigate the world, how we see ourselves, and really how we make decisions about very crucial things in our lives and in the lives of other people.
Ladies and gentlemen, ciao Tayana Maina. Congratulations, ciao. Our eighth winner has refocused the study of Jewish-Christian relations after the Holocaust by considering it as a history of debate and polemics rather than reconciliation. The selection committee was impressed with her rigorous and sophisticated historical analysis, which relies on a deep understanding of both religious traditions. I'm pleased to introduce Karma Ben Yochanan.
For centuries, rabbinic writings were subjected to censorship. Excerpts which were considered offensive to Christian sensibilities were erased or altered. Political, cultural, and religious transitions after World War II, such as Jewish-Christian rapprochement and the foundation of the State of Israel, released rabbinic communities from the fear of Christian enmity and allowed these previously censored texts to be recovered. However, as Karma Ben Yochanan's research shows, texts that were recovered because Christian authorities now exerted less anti-Jewish pressure were paradoxically often fiercely anti-Christian. This demonstrates that the process of reconciliation between Jews and Christians, rather than being straightforward, went in complex, even contradictory directions. Karma Ben Yochanan is a senior lecturer at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She works on religious tensions and dialogue in the context of Jewish-Christian relations.
An exciting aspect of my historiographic work is that it forces me to break the borders of my reserved academic surroundings and engage with people and intellectual traditions to which I wouldn't have access otherwise. When I first studied interfaith relations, I was acting as an unengaged, neutral historian who approaches her data like a biologist approaches the cell. But the religious agents who stood at the heart of my research opted for more mutuality, reflected back, criticized, and taught me that essentially neutrality is not an option. So I realized that a historian of dialogue cannot but participate in the experiment.
Mazal tov, Karma. Our ninth and final winner uses psychiatric case files to shed light on the experiences of individuals in some of the most traumatic political moments in European history. The selection committee described her as a highly original scholar who explores deeply significant topics and successfully connects them with current social needs. Here is Anna Antich.
At the end of the Second World War, psychiatrists in Yugoslavia diagnosed a new condition they termed partisan hysteria. This affected resistance fighters from the Communist Party who were considered war heroes, but were experiencing violent seizures that made them seem troubled and highly disruptive to the social order. As Anna Antich's research shows, these psychiatrists didn't ask what wartime trauma might have induced this hysteria. Instead, they viewed it as evidence that a generation of young working-class soldiers were unfit for their new political roles in a revolutionary socialist society. The medical discourse was shaped by contemporary politics and political anxieties about revolutionary change. Anna Antich is a professor of European history at the University of Copenhagen. She researches the history of psychiatry and psychology, both in the context of extreme regimes in Eastern Europe and in relation to decolonization after World War II.
I started out as a historian of 1940s Europe, of fascism, of extreme violence, and then I discovered the psychiatric patient files, which were interviews with patients, and I realized that they provided a unique historical insight into some of the most important research questions I had. For instance, how did extreme ideological strife affect everyday lives? How did it shape human behavior and responses? And how people's understandings of political ideas and political conflict evolved. So psychiatric patient files really outlined the emergence of mass politics in Eastern Europe.
Congratulations, Anna, and thank you to Professor Rubin and Professor Crew. I would like to invite you, Anna, to the podium to speak on behalf of all the winners of the 2023 Dan David Prize.
On behalf of all my fellow winners, I have the honor tonight to thank the Dan David Foundation, its board, and the selection committee for this recognition of our work. I am indeed humbled to be in the company of this year's recipients. As you have had the chance to learn in the video clips tonight, the winners of the 2023 Dan David Prize explore a wide variety of topics. Their work ranges from archaeological research to contemporary histories of the 20th and 21st centuries, and from histories of colonialism, slavery, state violence, and nation building, to cultural and political histories of science and medicine, and of religious ideas. But despite this exceptional diversity of our themes, methodologies, and theoretical frameworks, there are a number of core issues and values that connect our research. We share a concern with exploring the asymmetries of power in their different historical contexts. In our work, we seek to understand how complex mechanisms of power have produced visible and hidden forms of violence, injustice, and inequality, which have shaped our contemporary world in fundamental ways. We also all rely on a wide variety of untapped or neglected sources in order to bring into history writing those voices and perspectives which had often been excluded from historical narratives or marginalized as insignificant and peripheral. Finally, our research calls for rethinking political and historical geographies and for questioning the very notion of the periphery and its role in the interconnected global histories of politics, economy, and knowledge-making. Understanding historical mechanisms of violence, oppression, and political injustice is crucial if we are to comprehend the challenges of our present and future, both marked by extreme political uncertainty. The research of this year's recipients sheds light on the lasting legacies that historically rooted structures of violence, inequality, and marginalization have left in each one of our own societies. It helps us avoid simplistic accounts or relativization of oppression, and makes it possible for us, if we choose to do so, to engage with our world in informed, critical, and just ways. So I recognize this critical angle and commitment to understanding the far-reaching harm of historical exclusion and erasure as the core thread connecting this year's winners. So, on behalf of all of us, I would like to express my gratitude to the Dan David Foundation for rewarding precisely this kind of historical research, and for its commitment to celebrating the importance of the historical and archaeological professions, both within and outside academia. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and congratulations once more to all of our 9 winners. Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the winners of the 2023 Dan David Prize and to briefly glimpse some of the many stories they have to tell. We are pleased to announce that nominations for the 2024 prize will open next month, and we invite you to nominate those whose work should be honored in this way. We very much hope to see you all again next year. Good night and shalom.